Be me, Anne, 34, Senior HR Manager. Pretty proud of the workplace culture changes I've implemented. Mandatory bias training, improved maternity leave policies, zero tolerance for harassment. Finally, feel like women have a real voice here. Monday morning, get called into meeting with legal team and 2 external investigators. Apparently, there's been some kind of complaint filed. Think it's probably another case of some guy getting butthurt about our harassment policies. Walk in, confident, ready to defend my department's stellar record. Lead investigator introduces himself as Michael. Anne, we're here regarding allegations that you've systematically ignored and dismissed harassment complaints when the victims were male. Immediately, roll my eyes. Look, if this is about the David situation from last month, I explain that what he experienced doesn't really constitute harassment in the traditional sense. Michael pulls out a thick folder. Actually, we're looking at 17 separate incidents spanning the last 4 years. My stomach drops a little, but I maintain composure. 17. That seems like an exaggeration. I document everything thoroughly. Other investigator, Sarah, opens laptop. Let's start with the complaint from Robert in accounting, filed January 2020. She reads, female supervisor making repeated comments about his appearance, asking personal questions about his dating life, making jokes about his masculinity when he declined social invitations. Remember this case clearly. Robert was being oversensitive. Maria is just a friendly person. She wasn't targeting him because he's a man. Michael leans forward. Your notes indicate you told Robert that men need to learn to handle workplace banter and that he should appreciate female attention. Feel heat rising in my face. That's not exactly what I said. I was trying to help him understand that Maria didn't have malicious intent. Sarah continues reading more cases. Each one, remember, dismissing for valid reasons. These guys just don't understand how harassment actually works. It's about power dynamics, systemic oppression. Men hold institutional power, so the same behaviors don't carry the same weight. What about Tyler from IT? Michael asks. His supervisor, Jennifer, was sending him inappropriate texts, showing up at his desk constantly, making comments about his body. Jennifer is a strong woman in a male-dominated field. She was probably just trying to connect with her team members. Tyler said you told him he was being dramatic and should feel flattered. Getting frustrated now. Look, you have to understand the context here. Women face centuries of oppression in the workplace. When we finally have some women in leadership positions, men immediately cry harassment at normal interpersonal dynamics. Michael and Sarah exchange glances. Anne, can you explain why your department handled 37 harassment complaints from women in the same time? Period. But you closed all 17 male complaints without investigation. Stand up, pacing now. Because those are completely different situations. When a woman says she's uncomfortable, there's a legitimate power imbalance at play. Men have always controlled workplace culture. They can't just suddenly claim victim status when women finally have some agency. Sarah pulls up more files. What about Thomas in marketing? His female colleague was sending him explicit photos, cornering him in supply closets, threatening his job performance reviews when he rejected her advances. Remember Thomas, such a whiner. Thomas never seemed genuinely distressed about the situation. He was probably enjoying the attention and then got buyer's remorse. Michael's voice gets sharper. Thomas attempted suicide last year. His therapist's notes cite workplace harassment as a contributing factor. Feel a small pang of something, but push it down. That's tragic, but correlation isn't causation. Men attempt suicide for many reasons, usually related to toxic masculinity and inability to process emotions healthily. Did you know that Jennifer, the supervisor we mentioned, was promoted to department head last year despite multiple complaints? Sarah asks. Jennifer is an exceptional employee. I wasn't going to let some baseless complaints derail her career trajectory. Even though she had 3 separate men report her for sexual harassment. Those men were clearly uncomfortable with a woman in authority. It's a classic pattern of undermining female leadership. Michael stands up. And we've also discovered that you coached several female employees on how to file complaints against male supervisors, but you discouraged male employees from filing formal complaints. Getting really heated now. Women need support navigating a system that's historically silenced them. Men already know how to advocate for themselves. They run everything. Actually, Sarah says, pulling out recordings, we have audio of you telling Kevin from sales, and I quote, "Men can't really be sexually harassed by women. It's not the same thing. You're just being sensitive." Shit. Forgot about that recording. That was taken out of context. I was trying to educate Kevin about systemic power structures. Michael sits back down. Help us understand your logic, Anne. Walk us through your decision-making process. Finally, someone wants to actually hear my reasoning. Look, harassment isn't just about individual interactions. It's about systemic oppression and power imbalances. Women have been marginalized in workplaces for decades. When men complain about female behavior, they're often just uncomfortable with women finally having some agency and confidence. So you believe men cannot be harassed by women? Sarah asks. Not in the same way, no. Context matters. Historical context, power dynamics, systemic inequality. A woman making comments to a man isn't the same as a man making comments to a woman because of centuries of patriarchal structures. Michael pulls out another document. What about statistical data showing that male harassment complaints have increased 340% industry-wide in the past 5 years? That just proves my point. Men are feeling threatened by women's growing workplace equality. They're weaponizing harassment claims to undermine female progress. Sarah looks incredulous. So you think men are lying about being harassed? Not lying exactly, but misinterpreting normal social interactions through a lens of male fragility. Men aren't used to women being assertive or confident. They mistake normal female behavior for harassment because they expect women to be passive and deferential. Michael's getting visibly angry now. Anne, do you hear yourself? You're essentially arguing that men's experiences don't matter because of their gender. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that context matters. You can't ignore historical and systemic factors when evaluating individual complaints. What if the genders were reversed in these situations? Sarah asks. Would you tell a woman that she was being oversensitive if her male supervisor was sending her explicit photos and cornering her? That's completely different. Women face genuine threats in those situations. Men are physically stronger, hold more institutional power. The dynamic is entirely different. Michael slams his hand on the table. Jesus Christ, Anne, listen to yourself. You're saying that sexual harassment is okay if the perpetrator is a woman and the victim is a man. Jump at his outburst, but stand my ground. Don't raise your voice at me, and don't twist my words. I'm talking about systemic analysis, not individual justification. No, you're talking about discrimination, Michael shouts back. You've created a workplace where half the population's complaints are automatically dismissed based solely on their gender. I've created a workplace where women finally feel safe to speak up and assert themselves. Sarah tries to calm things down. Anne, let's look at this practically. 3 men have left the company citing harassment. 2 have filed external complaints with state agencies. 1 attempted suicide. How do you justify these outcomes? Individual outcomes don't negate the broader pattern of male resistance to female empowerment. Sometimes progress requires some discomfort. Michael turns red. Discomfort? Thomas almost died. Robert had panic attacks for months. Tyler transferred departments and took a pay cut to escape his supervisor. Those men chose those responses. I can't be responsible for how people react to workplace dynamics they don't understand. You absolutely can be responsible, Michael yells. You're the HR manager. Your job is to protect all employees from harassment, not just the ones who fit your ideological framework. My job is to create equitable workplaces, and sometimes that means challenging existing power structures, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Sarah pulls up more documents. Anne, we found emails where you explicitly told male complainants that they should examine their own biases, and Consider whether they're really victims or just uncomfortable with changing dynamics. I was encouraging self-reflection and growth. Men need to interrogate their assumptions about women in the workplace. Michael's practically screaming now. You told a man being sexually harassed that he needed to examine his biases. What the hell is wrong with you? Nothing is wrong with me. I'm trying to create meaningful change instead of perpetuating systems that silence women's voices. By silencing men's voices instead? Sarah asks quietly. The question hits differently than the yelling. Feel momentarily uncertain, but push through. Men's voices have never been silenced. This is the first time in history they're experiencing what women have always experienced. Michael stands up again. That's it. That's exactly the problem. You see harassment complaints as a zero-sum game between genders instead of individual employees deserving protection. I see harassment complaints as occurring within existing power structures that you're conveniently ignoring. Sarah starts reading from another file. Jennifer, the supervisor you promoted, was investigated by external agencies after Thomas's incident. They found a pattern of predatory behavior spanning multiple jobs. She specifically targeted young, quiet men who were unlikely to report her. Feel something cold in my stomach. That investigation was biased. They were looking for problems because of the political climate. Michael laughs bitterly. Political climate. And she had photos of male employees on her personal phone. She was running a spreadsheet rating men in the office. She was literally predatory. You don't know the full context of those materials. Women are allowed to have opinions about their colleagues. Sarah shows me printouts, explicit photos, detailed sexual comments, a literal scoring system for male employees. Feel the room spinning a little. This doesn't represent systematic harassment. This is just Jennifer has poor judgment in her personal communications. Michael grabs the papers. Poor judgment. She rated Thomas a 9 out of 10 for conquest difficulty and wrote detailed plans for isolating him from other employees. You're interpreting personal notes through a lens of assumption. Women are allowed to find men attractive and express that privately. She destroyed his mental health, Michael screams. She systematically broke down his confidence, isolated him from colleagues, and threatened his career. And you protected her. I protected a qualified female employee from a hostile work environment created by male discomfort with female authority. Sarah pulls out more recordings. We also have audio of you coaching Jennifer on how to reframe her behavior if questioned, and telling her that men's complaints shouldn't be taken too seriously. Shit. I was helping a colleague navigate unfair scrutiny. Women's behavior is constantly policed in ways men's isn't. Michael sits down, looking exhausted. Anne, I need you to listen very carefully. Forget gender for a moment. Forget politics. Forget power structures. Forget everything except basic human decency. You can't forget gender when gender shapes every interaction in society. Just listen, please. He takes a breath. An employee came to you saying they felt unsafe at work. They said someone was making them uncomfortable, threatening their job, sending unwanted sexual communications. What should your response be? It depends on context, on who the people are, on historical dynamics, on power relationships. No, it doesn't. Your response should be to investigate and protect that employee. Period. Sarah nods. Anne, harassment isn't about gender politics. It's about one person using power to harm another person. That can happen in any direction. But it doesn't happen in a vacuum. You can't ignore centuries of male dominance and suddenly pretend men and women are equally positioned in society. Michael pounds the table again. We're not talking about society. We're talking about individual human beings who came to you for help and you failed them. I didn't fail anyone. I made decisions based on comprehensive analysis of power dynamics and systemic inequality. You failed Thomas, he shouts. You failed Robert. You failed Tyler. You failed every man who trusted you to do your job. My job is to advance equity, not to enable male fragility. Your job is to protect employees from harassment. All employees. Sarah shows me legal documents. Anne, the company is facing 4 lawsuits. The State Labor Board is investigating. Your actions have created massive liability. Legal systems are designed to protect male power structures. Of course they'd side with men claiming victimhood. Michael looks at me with disgust. You know what? You're right about one thing. There is a power imbalance here. Exactly. Finally, you're seeing the power imbalance is that you had authority over vulnerable employees and you abused it. The words hit like a slap. I never abused any authority. I used my position to create positive change. You used your position to dismiss harassment based on the victim's gender. That's textbook discrimination. Sarah starts gathering documents. And, based on this investigation, we're recommending your immediate termination and referral to state employment authorities. Feel panic rising. You can't do this. I've dedicated my career to making this workplace safer for women. Michael shakes his head. You've made it more dangerous for everyone. You've legitimized harassment as long as it serves your agenda. I don't have an agenda. I have principles. I believe in equity and justice. You believe in selective justice based on gender, which isn't justice at all. Sarah stands up. The company will be conducting remedial training and bringing in new HR leadership. Several of your decisions are being reversed. You're going to undo years of progress. Women will lose the protections I fought to establish. We're going to protect all employees equally, which is what you should have been doing all along. Michael gathers his papers. Anne, I want you to think about something. You claim to fight for justice, but you denied justice to multiple victims because they were the wrong gender. Those men weren't victims. They were obstacles to female advancement. They were human beings deserving basic respect and protection, and you failed them completely. Feel tears starting. You don't understand what I was trying to accomplish here. Women have been silenced for so long. I was trying to level the playing field by rigging it in the opposite direction, Sarah says softly. That's not leveling. That's just discrimination with better marketing. Michael stops at the door. You want to know the really tragic part, Anne? You've probably set back legitimate women's causes by years. When HR departments selectively enforce policies, it undermines trust in the entire system. That's not my fault. That's society's fault for not understanding systemic inequality. No, he says quietly. That's your fault for confusing activism with administration. Your job wasn't to be a crusader, it was to be fair. Fairness without context isn't really fairness. Discrimination with context is still discrimination. They leave me alone in the conference room. Sit there trying to process what just happened. These people just don't understand the bigger picture. They're so focused on individual cases, they can't see the forest for the trees. Pull out phone to call my friend Rachel. Need someone who understands what I'm dealing with. Rachel, I'm being railroaded at work. They're trying to make me responsible for male employees being uncomfortable with strong women. Wait, slow down. What exactly happened? Explain the whole situation. How investigation found patterns in how I handled complaints. How they're claiming I discriminated against men. Jess, did you actually dismiss harassment complaints from men? I evaluated them within proper context. Men and women don't experience harassment the same way. Long pause from Rachel. Jess, I've known you for 10 years. You're passionate about women's rights, but did you actually ignore legitimate complaints? They weren't legitimate in the traditional sense. These men were just uncomfortable with female assertiveness. Another pause. Honey, what if it was your brother calling you? What if someone at his work was harassing him and HR dismissed it because he's a man? Never thought about it that way, but that's different. My brother would handle himself differently. That's not the same thing, Rachel. My brother has male privilege. He'd never be in that position. But what if he was? What if someone was genuinely harassing him and no one believed him because of his gender? getting frustrated with Rachel too now. You're missing the point. Individual scenarios don't matter when there's systematic oppression at play. Jess, listen to yourself. You're saying individual people don't matter if they don't fit your theory. I'm saying context matters. Power dynamics matter. History matters. Rachel sighs. I think maybe you got so focused on the big picture that you lost sight of actual people. That's not justice, Jess. That's ideology. Hang up on her. She doesn't understand either. Nobody understands what I was trying to accomplish. Drive home thinking about everything. Maybe I made some procedural errors. Maybe I could have been more diplomatic in my explanations. But I was fighting for something important. Trying to create real change in a hostile environment. Get home and pour a large glass of wine. Sit on couch scrolling through news articles about workplace discrimination. Find several pieces about male harassment victims being ignored. But those articles miss the broader context too. They treat these issues like they exist in a vacuum. Check email and see message from company lawyer. Termination is effective immediately. They're also investigating whether to press charges for civil rights violations. Feel sick to my stomach. This is insane. I was protecting people, not victimizing them. Call my sister Amy. Amy, I got fired today. They're saying I discriminated against men. Oh shit, Jess. What happened? Explain the whole investigation, how they twisted my reasonable decisions into discrimination. Amy listens quietly. Jess, can I ask you something without you getting mad? Sure. Do you think it's possible that you were so focused on helping women that you accidentally hurt some men? I didn't hurt anyone. I just refused to enable male fragility. But what if some of those guys were genuinely being harassed? What if they really needed help and you didn't give it to them? Amy, you don't understand workplace power dynamics. Men hold systemic advantages that change how these interactions should be interpreted. I understand power dynamics, but I also understand that individuals can be hurt regardless of their group membership. Getting angry again. Why is everyone acting like I'm the villain here? So, you think I should have treated female harassers the same as male harassers, even though the context is completely different? I think you should have protected people who were being hurt, regardless of their gender. That's not how social justice works, Amy. Long silence. Maybe that's the problem, Jess. Maybe you confuse social justice with individual justice. They're the same thing. No, they're not. Social justice is about groups and systems. Individual justice is about treating each person fairly. Sometimes those conflict. Hang up on Amy, too. Pour another glass of wine. Everyone's acting like I'm some kind of monster, like I was running around deliberately hurting people. I was trying to make things better. Spend the evening researching legal defenses. Discrimination law is so complex. Maybe I can argue that my decisions were based on legitimate policy analysis, that I was implementing equity-based approaches to harassment prevention. Find several articles about reverse discrimination lawsuits. Most of them are frivolous complaints by men who can't handle workplace equality. But some describe situations similar to mine. HR managers who got in trouble for overcorrecting historical discrimination. Start drafting email to legal team, need to explain my reasoning more clearly. They obviously don't understand the theoretical framework behind my decisions. If I can just articulate the academic basis for differential treatment based on power dynamics, delete the draft. Realize it sounds exactly like what Michael and Sarah were criticizing, treating individual people as representatives of larger groups, rather than as individuals deserving protection. Lie in bed that night, replaying conversations, Thomas attempting suicide, Tyler transferring departments, Robert having panic attacks. These aren't abstract policy outcomes. These are actual people who got hurt. But they got hurt because they couldn't handle changing workplace dynamics. Not because I did anything wrong, right? Try to sleep, but keep thinking about Michael's question. What if the genders were reversed? If a male HR manager had dismissed harassment complaints from women because women are oversensitive or women need to handle workplace banter, I'd be furious. I'd call it textbook discrimination. But that's different because can't finish the thought. Because it is different. Has to be different. Otherwise, everything I've worked for is meaningless. Everything I believe about justice and equity is wrong. Finally, fall asleep around 3 a.m. Wake up to phone ringing. Reporter from local newspaper wants comment about the investigation. No comment, hang up immediately. Check online and see article already published. Local company faces discrimination lawsuit after HR manager allegedly ignored male harassment victims. Feel nauseous reading the details. They make it sound like I was deliberately protecting female predators, like I had some kind of agenda against men. The comments section is brutal, calling me every name in the book, demanding I face criminal charges, but buried in the comments are a few defending me. Women talking about how hard it is to be taken seriously in male-dominated workplaces, how men claiming harassment often are just uncomfortable with female authority. These women get it. They understand what I was actually trying to do. Spend day researching, employment lawyers. Most won't take my case. The evidence is too clear that I treated people differently based on gender. Finally find one willing to argue that my decisions were based on legitimate academic theories about power dynamics. Meet with lawyer next week, explain my reasoning about systemic inequality and historical context. He listens patiently. Anne, I understand your theoretical framework, but employment law doesn't recognize contextual discrimination as a defense. But shouldn't law evolve to reflect more sophisticated understanding of power structures? He shakes his head. Maybe in theory, but in practice, you have to treat individual employees equally, regardless of your analysis of group dynamics. Even when that perpetuates systemic inequality. Even then, your job was to apply policy consistently, not to correct historical injustices through selective enforcement. Leave lawyer's office feeling defeated. Everything I worked for is being framed as discrimination. My attempts to create equity are being called prejudice. The system is so resistant to real change. Get home to find process server waiting. Being sued by 3 former employees, civil rights violations, emotional distress, hostile work environment. The irony is crushing. I'm being accused of creating the exact conditions I spent my career fighting. Call Rachel back. Rach, I think I need to really examine what happened here. I'm glad to hear you say that, but I still don't think I was wrong about the broader principles. Maybe you weren't wrong about the principles, but wrong about how you applied them. Think about that conversation for days. Maybe the problem wasn't my understanding of power dynamics. Maybe it was thinking that understanding justified treating individuals unfairly. But if you can't make decisions based on systemic analysis, how do you create real change? Start attending unemployment hearings. Company presents evidence of my differential. Treatment of complaints. My lawyer argues that I was implementing equity-based policies. Hearing officer asks direct question, did you dismiss harassment complaints based on the complainant's gender? Long pause before answering. I evaluated complaints within the context of historical power dynamics and systemic inequality. That's not what I asked. Did you treat male and female complainants differently? Another pause. Yes, but with legitimate justification based on... Thank you, that's all I need to hear. Denied unemployment benefits. Decision states that differential treatment based on gender constitutes discrimination regardless of stated rationale. Appeal denied. State Employment Board opens formal investigation. Professional reputation destroyed. Months later, sitting in mediation with Thomas's lawyer. He's seeking damages for emotional distress and lost wages. Looking at him across the table, realize I never actually saw him as a person. Just as a representative of male privilege who needed to be educated about power dynamics. His lawyer reads impact statement, panic attacks, insomnia, loss of confidence, relationship problems. My client trusted your HR department to protect him, and you failed him because of his gender. Want to argue about context and power structures. But looking at Thomas, just see someone who got hurt. Settlement negotiations drag on. My lawyer keeps pushing contextual discrimination defense, but even he admits it's not legally viable. Anne, you need to decide whether you want to keep fighting this or acknowledge what happened and try to move forward. Realize I've been so focused on being right about systemic inequality that I stopped caring about individual fairness. Thought I was fighting injustice but created new injustice. Tried to be a warrior for women's rights and became exactly what I claimed to fight against. Someone in power who abused that power to harm others based on their identity. Settle all lawsuits out of court. Agree to never work in HR again. Publicly apologize for my errors in judgment. But still can't bring myself to say I was fundamentally wrong. Just that I made implementation mistakes. Year later, working retail while trying to rebuild life. News article appears about new harassment prevention training at my former company. Training emphasizes equal protection for all employees regardless of gender. Includes quote from new HR director, "Everyone deserves safety and respect at work, period." Read that quote over and over. So simple. Why couldn't I see it that way? Why did everything have to be about groups and systems and historical context? Why couldn't I just protect people who needed protection? Lying in bed that night, finally understand what Michael meant. I became so focused on correcting historical injustice that I created present injustice. Thought my good intentions justified bad outcomes. Believed my understanding of power dynamics gave me permission to use power unfairly. But now understand that believing in justice for groups doesn't mean you get to deny justice to individuals. Learn the hard way that becoming the thing you claim to fight against is easier than you think, especially when you convince yourself it's for a good cause. Maybe the real lesson is that justice isn't about choosing sides. It's about treating each person with dignity regardless of what group they belong to. Took destroying my career and hurting innocent people to learn that. But at least I finally learned it.